I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Hi, and welcome back to Seamwork Radio. So today we're talking about niche sewing. And we're going to cover what we mean when we say niche sewing. And we're also going to talk about why trying out a new sewing niche can keep your creativity flowing and how to jump into a new sewing niche. So we have an icebreaker today from Kathleen from Bremerton, and she posted on our community and asked, what's the most unusual thing you've ever sewn? And before we answer that, she also included her answer to this. So she said, for me, it was an adult-sized condom costume for a safe sex dance when I was in college. I refused to wear the costume as I was too shy, but I did most of the sewing. Yes, there's a picture of my friend in the costume. So I think Kathleen might win this contest. I'm not sure.
She wins. She wins all contests, actually.
What about you? What's the most unusual thing you've ever sewn, Haley?
I've sewn like a lot of like really weird things. I did a lot of like random like contract sewing when I lived in LA, just pick up like little odd jobs here and there to like literally pay my rent. Okay. One, this is like just kind of like odd. It's not, an adult sized condom, but I worked next door to this cold pressed juice place, and the bags that they used in their juice machines that like all of the pulp would go into, and then like this really crazy strong machine would like squeeze the bags. These bags were always breaking. And so I had a deal with the lady who owned this place that I would repair the bags on her machine or for her machine for unlimited juice. And this is like LA cold pressed juice. So these things were like $12 a piece. I was like broke. And I was like, yes, I'm going to drink so much fancy juice. It was like easy too. There's a little bit of like darning stuff I had to do, but the seams on these bags were just like always breaking. I would say that was like one of the most like unusual little like odd sewing jobs I've ever had.
And you were so well hydrated though.
I was so well hydrated. I drank so much beet juice.
Your skin must have been glowing, all those vitamins and minerals.
Totally.
Wow. Yeah. That reminds me of like, if you've ever made nut milk, like the nut milk. Is that what it's like? It's like those bags?
Yeah, basically. But it was like really, I imagine it was like acrylic or something. It was almost like burlap or something made from like acrylic. It was wild. And they had these like big grommets that would latch, like you'd hook those onto the machine, and then this big like vise would squeeze everything out.
Wow.
Now
I gotta look up YouTube videos of that.
I was repairing these for her all the time. I'm like, man, they need to like really improve their product here. Like,
yeah. Sounds like not an ideal solution.
No, it wasn't.
I was trying to think about what's the most unusual thing that I've ever sewn. And I've sewn a lot of really weird stuff when I was young. I mean, I just had like crazy taste when I was young and did a lot of weird things. I just made myself some very strange clothes, but I was thinking about costumes I made because those are probably some of the most unusual things. And I made myself this huge like 19th century dress. I don't remember if it was for Halloween or some other costume activity. I have no idea. It was in like a white taffeta that had like flocked black velvet kind of brocade-ish pattern on it. So very costumey. And it had a corset. It had a huge skirt with a bustle. It was just like enormous. I think it was like 15 yards of fabric went into this thing. And it was so uncomfortable and so impossible to move around in. And I don't even remember where I wore it, but I do remember that I also had hot pink hair at the time. So it was quite a look. It was a lot of look, as Tim Gunn would say.
A lot of look. Yeah. Well, it's going to be good if it involves 15 yards of fabric.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be special.
At the very least. When I was in school and one of the history of fashion classes that I took, there was this sort of expert that came in and showed us like all sorts of like undergarments and petticoats and all this stuff. And then they had one of the students try on all of like the layers that like 18th, early 19th century woman would have worn typically. And then had you try to do like normal everyday tasks, like pick up your keys off the ground or like sit down or bring a cup of coffee to your mouth. It was really funny.
Another reason to be thankful that we live today, despite all the problems of modern times.
For sure.
So today we're going to be talking about niche sewing, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how we define niche sewing and what that means. So when we're talking about niche sewing, we're talking about sewing things that are specific enough that you kind of need to learn more specified skills in order to do them. So these are things like bra making or learning to make swimwear, maybe bridal if you're sewing with some specialized fabrics like lace, shoemaking, sewing with leather, doing kind of historical, maybe corsets, millinery, costumes, tailoring is another one. So those are some of the niches you might consider when we're talking about niche sewing. Haley, what kind of niche sewing have you done?
Well, you know I'm a dabbler. So I've done like everything that you've listed. I've done except for really like historical type stuff. I haven't really sewn a lot, but I've made shoes and corsets. I took a millinery class, this whole semester of it. Same with shoemaking. I used to make wedding dresses for people. I just love experimenting in different areas of sewing or even sewing adjacent things because I feel like it enriches my sewing practice so much. When I was in college, I was like, had this mindset of like, it cost the same amount for me to take 12 units as it did to take 18 units. So I was always like, I'm going to get my money's worth. I'm going to sign up. In the fashion department, there was tons of like different classes, leather working, shoemaking, all sorts of things. And so I always took as many of those as I could physically fit in my schedule. Sometimes like to the, detriment of my like mental and physical health, but it was totally worth it because I learned so much cool stuff. What about you, Sarai?
Most of the ones we named, I have done. The only one I think on this list is shoemaking. I've actually never made shoes. I've always wanted to, but it's just not something I've ever tried. So I would like to make some slippers. I really love those like velvet smoking shoe kind of slippers, that kind of look like loafers.
Yeah.
And I've been looking for some, and I can't really find any that aren't like super cheap and awful or really expensive. So that would be a good opportunity to try shoemaking, I think.
And we have that article in Seamwork about making, they're like smoking slippers. I think that it's intended for leather and faux leather, but you could probably figure it out with some velvet.
Yeah, or even put velvet over leather or over some other stiffer material. Yeah, I would like to try that. I was just looking at that article the other day and thinking about it. But everything else, I think I've done. I definitely went through historical costuming, corset period when I was young. I've made some hats. I made my hat for my wedding. I made like a little fascinator for my wedding. I love playing with little millinery things like feathers and stuff like that. It's so fun. And tailoring, I've done some of that. Yeah, I think pretty much everything on this list I've tried. And they all have taught me something special and, I don't know, helped me, kind of like you're saying, just rediscover a love for sewing in general. So, Haley, thinking about some of this, more specialty sewing that you've done, what are some of the lessons that you feel like you've learned from dabbling in all these different niches?
So many lessons. Okay. So number one would be embracing and learning to love that feeling and experience of being a beginner. Being a beginner is like, so I think it's very magical because everything is new. You're learning so much so quickly. And The beginner phase is when, like, kind of in anything, is when you see these really big leaps in your skills and your knowledge. And I think that's a really exciting time. And that, like, helps you build kind of momentum in your creativity.
Mm-hmm. When we were talking about this before, I was thinking about I like to work out and lift weights.
Mm-hmm.
And when you first start lifting weights, you get a lot of gains really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
They call them newbie gains. It's like the first year you get stronger and stronger every time you work out, and you really, really see your progress. And it's super, super motivating. And a lot of people start to kind of lose that motivation, or if they have to find new motivation after that first year.
Mm-hmm.
When your improvements start to really slow down, you're not getting stronger every single time. So, and I think it's the same with sewing. You know, your first year, you're learning so much, and it's so motivating because every time you sew, you can make something you weren't able to make last time. And then once you get a little bit more advanced, you kind of have to find that beginner groove again somehow and kind of find different ways to engage yourself.
Totally. Totally. So I just think, like, switching it up in your, like, creative practice and becoming a beginner again through, like, niche sewing is, like, really inspiring to kind of kickstart those, like, creative juices.
Mm-hmm.
I also find that in my niche sewing that I find lessons that are really applicable to my everyday sewing, like both kind of technically and mentally. So some examples might be, you learn a lot about precision sewing when you're making bras or even like corsets or underpinnings of sorts. With tailoring, you learn a lot about working slowly, not skipping any steps. You also learn a lot about kind of the guts of things and how they work, and creating stability and building out pieces to create shapes. In millinery, which I really enjoyed exploring, I learned a ton of hand sewing, and I learned a lot about like the power of steam and how you can create shapes using heat and steam.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those lessons, I was able to like take those things and apply them to my everyday sewing. I use that hand sewing stuff all the time. I use my knowledge of like different interfacings and support work all the time. These are all things that I use not just in those niche areas.
Yeah, I definitely find that to be true too, especially with the bra making and precision, like you mentioned, because the seam allowances they have to be so precise when you're making a bra, because little tiny changes can make a big difference in the fit. And I think that really did teach me a lot about how to be more precise with my sewing.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting to think about the ways that these projects that you've done over the years can contribute to this larger whole.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Something else that I think kind of relates to being a beginner is that when you're new to something, you do a ton of research. With every project, you take a minute and at the beginning, and you Google everything and you look up all the terms and all the materials. And as you progress in your skill set with sewing, for instance, you tend to kind of drop this phase a little bit. You don't do as much research. Maybe it's just me, but I get like a little cocky sometimes in my sewing. And going back to that beginner mindset reminds you that the research phase is really important, and that maybe we shouldn't skip it so often.
Yeah. And it's exciting too. I like doing research.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun to learn before you learn, kind of, and kind of understand the concepts before you actually use your hands to make something.
Totally.
It can be really fun.
Totally. Another lesson that I've learned is to look for that kind of tactile enjoyment for new materials. So when you're like making shoes, you get to play with leather. When you're making bras, you get to play with like lace and power mesh and all sorts of things. And this is like really fun. And it's a good reminder to kind of branch out from your like tried and true fabrics. If you get in a rut sewing too many things in linen, maybe maybe you need some denim. Maybe you need some silk in there. Maybe some jersey. Mix it up sometimes. And I think people who enjoy sewing just innately like get a lot of enjoyment from like touching and feeling things. And working with new materials is really joyful.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's appealing about it is you can work in things you might not normally work with. Like maybe you don't wear a lot of, lace or silk outside, but you might want to make like a silk bra, really fancy silk bra, just as an example. Maybe you don't, but you can kind of incorporate fabrics you don't normally use or materials you don't normally use, which I don't know. To me, that's really nice because I might not. These days, I wear kind of the same thing, same types of things every day, and don't get a chance to wear some of those fancier fabrics.
Totally. Something that we wanted to bring up is if you don't feel like you're skilled enough quite yet to do the niche sewing that you're really interested in, then look for some of those skills that you need to build in order to get to that goal. So an example might be if you really want to like get into tailoring and make yourself like a badass suit. Maybe start by learning about pressing tools and maybe even acquiring some of those tools and practicing those techniques, because if you want to do tailoring, you got to get real friendly with your iron and your pressing tools, and learning those now are going to help you kind of get there. So if you are in the beginning of your sewing journey and you're not quite to that niche sewing place yet, that doesn't mean that you should put off your dreams of niche sewing entirely. Think about those kind of component skills that you'll need and focus on those. Take those little baby steps.
Yeah. I think it can be helpful to get some kind of a learning resource like a class or a book or something that's going to help you to learn, and use that to kind of break down what skills you might ultimately need and use them to work on maybe smaller projects or easier projects in the meantime.
Totally. And for those of you who are further along in your sewing journey, if you're feeling bored or burned out, we just want to like encourage you to try a niche project. Maybe it's the change in pace that you really need to rekindle your excitement about sewing and making again.
Yeah, we've been kind of talking about this as sort of, this is like the choose your own adventure phase of sewing. Once you kind of have mastered the basics and even gone beyond the basics, you can start to kind of look into these different paths that you can take that'll help keep you engaged and interested in trying new things. So I'm just going to recap what we talked about today. We had a bunch of lessons learned from niche sewing that I wanted to share. So first one was embrace being a beginner again, and remember that feeling of being a beginner. That can be really, really exciting when you start exploring a niche. You can find lessons that are applicable to your everyday sewing when you do some niche sewing. Some of the examples we gave were the precision you learn from bra making, for example, or from tailoring, you might learn how to go more slowly. So those are lessons you can take back. The other thing about niche sewing is it reminds you to do the research phase, which helps you to keep learning and prevents boredom. It also allows you to look for some tactile enjoyment of materials that maybe you don't get to use all the time. And if you're more of a beginner and you're not really skilled enough to do whatever niche sewing you're interested in, you can look into skills you need to build along the way. And if you are more experienced and you're starting to feel a little bit bored with sewing or maybe a little bit burned out, tackling a niche project might be just what you need to get you going again. So that's what we have today on niche sewing. I hope you guys are inspired to try something new, whether you're a beginner or not. I think there's always something that we can learn from trying a new area when we sew. So if you liked this episode, please leave us a review. We would super, super appreciate it. We read all our reviews and we love hearing from you on there. We have a review here from, I think it's pronounced Nirdil, Nirdil, Nirdil. And she said, "What a great fit series. I enjoyed the 2 episodes 59 and 60 especially. I do obsess over fit and it does interfere with my enjoyment. Thank you." So that's really great to hear. I'm glad that people are enjoying some of those episodes. We'll plan some more fit-related episodes for you in the future. And if fit is something that you're working on, you should check out our free fit journal. Our fit journal gives you a place to work through your fitting process, and it has handy tips for diagnosing your fit along the way too. And when you sign up to get it, you also get a 5-part Jumpstart Your Fitting email series where we walk you through the 5 steps to get a great fit using the journal. And it's totally free, and you can download it instantly on our site at seamwork.com/go/fitjournal. So that's seamwork.com/go/fitjournal. And that's all one word. So that's it from us today. I'm Sarai.
I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork, or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.